This is the story about one of Melbourne's most sadistic and ruthless criminals, a cold-blooded Bulgarian who took pleasure from terrorizing his victims without any remorse, a man who arrived from Bulgaria as a refugee and transformed into one of Australia's most psychopathic and cold-blooded criminals for over 2 decades. This is the story of Nikolai Minev Radev. Nikolai Radev was born on January 29, 1959, into Soviet-influenced Bulgaria, a time when the secret police controlled the population through fear. And growing up in this atmosphere, Radev witnessed the influence of violence from an early age. During this era, Bulgaria dominated in the wrestling sport on the global stage, bringing glory to the country by earning numerous medals and titles. The athletes were sponsored by the state and lived lavishly compared to their comrades. Radev was a champion wrestler, but he wasn't interested in bringing glory to Bulgaria. Instead, he got involved in criminal activities and served time in a Soviet-style jail, in which he quickly developed contacts with the Russian mafia. In 1981, Radev fled to Australia and was granted refugee status. He already had an extensive criminal past, and it is believed that the Russian mafia's influence helped him enter the country with a clean record. With the clock ticking on his refugee visa, he acted fast and persuaded a young hairdresser to marry him, which would secure his future in Australia. He then went on to make an honest living for the first 2 years, working at his in-laws' fish and chip restaurant before opening a pizza shop. However, that wasn't enough for Radev, as he believed that crime was a better way to make a living, and from that point on, he would never work a regular job again or pay a cent in taxes. It is believed that after immigrating to Australia, he became one of the key operatives and enforcers for the Russian mafia's activities in Melbourne, earning him the nickname The Russian. His former wife said that Radev always wanted to be a gangster and that he had no fear or shame. Crime was a power thing for him, and he wanted to be like Al Pacino in Scarface. He was supposedly a very charming man. He was very popular among women, and his wife fell for his charms. He subjected her to years of torture and abuse, and she was terrified that he would make her disappear if she tried to leave him. Radev later told her that the only reason he married her was to get Australian citizenship. In 1985, he was jailed in Victoria for drug trafficking. However, after experiencing prison in Bulgaria, this was like a weekend retreat for him. Going to prison allowed him to expand his connections in the criminal underworld and plan his next moves for when he got out. When people get out of jail, you'd expect them to be ready to turn their life around, but this wasn't the case for Radev. After being released, a man by the name of Ivan Solikov went missing out of nowhere. Solikov was a hard-working immigrant who worked in a car factory but suddenly disappeared. From that moment on, Radev began using Solikov's identity whenever questioned by the police, even going so far to appear in court under his name. This allowed him to continue committing crimes in Australia without acquiring a criminal record under his real name. It took police several years to figure out the scheme, and it is believed that Radev took Solikov's life solely to steal his identity. He began associating with other rising criminal figures like Housam Zayat, Sadat Ceylan, and Mark Malia. In 1998, Radev and Zayat were charged for a violent home invasion where a 71-year-old man was beaten and his granddaughter was tied to a bed and threatened with a handgun. Radev loved violence. He'd firebomb rival drug dealers' cars and would openly threaten police when they arrested him. At one point, Radev went to prison under the suspicion of taking the lives of police officers. Inside, he met Sadat Ceylan, a Turkish-born inmate weighing about 50 kilograms. Ceylan's frail appearance made him a frequent target for other inmates, so Radev offered him protection. In exchange, Ceylan had to arrange payments to Radev and his associates, and even after Ceylan's release from prison, payment demands from Radev didn't stop. At one point, Radev and Zayat invited Ceylan to a hotel room where they tortured him for 6 hours, demanding $120,000. They even hung him by his feet from the 7th-floor balcony. Ceylan managed to escape, and fearing for his life, he quickly fled to Turkey on a false passport. Radev was apprehended for blackmailing Sadat Ceylan and for possessing an illegal firearm. During the interrogation, it would come to light that Radev was using Ivan Solikov's identity, and despite the mountain of evidence, Radev was released. He was now anxious about the threat of deportation, so he decided to take matters into his own hands and went after the detective who interrogated him by obtaining his home address. It's believed that a corrupt member of the Victorian police force sold the officer's address to Radev for $30,000. Radev was seething with anger and wouldn't stop at anything until he found the detective who threatened his freedom. He went to the detective's parents' hotel, allegedly armed with a grenade, and confronted the detective's father, demanding to know if his son was there. The incident left the family so shaken that they decided to sell the hotel and move away. The detective went into hiding, and Radev continued on his criminal path. He invaded the lives of his victims until they met his demands, and innocent family members were dragged into his world of horror. No one was safe. It was reported that he even a man who owed him money in front of the man's wife. By 2001, Radev had established himself as a significant figure in the underworld. He hired out a professional kickboxer to be his bodyguard and rented a home in Brighton. He chose to live separately from his wife and child, but he made sure their expenses were covered, and he would always shower them in expensive gifts. He began wearing expensive Versace clothing, and when he wanted his teeth fixed, he dropped $55,000 in cash for a set of top-range crowns. He also dropped $100,000 on an all-black Mercedes. Most of this money was coming from drug dealing, and his level of expertise was setting up drug deals and robbing the dealers on the spot. By 2003, Radev was in the center of operations, and business was booming in Melbourne. Around this time, he was closely linked with Carl Williams, who still controlled the amphetamine trade. Radev was pushing product and was buying most of it from Carl, but his ambition pushed him to seek total control. At one point, he pressured Williams for an introduction with the cook, who produced excellent product. Williams, however, was fully aware of Radev's intentions. He knew that Radev planned to take the cook to a secluded location and pressure him into working exclusively for him. This wasn't anything out of the ordinary for Radev, as he allegedly boasted that he would have cooks working around the clock, producing product 24/7. Once, he even forced a university science student to cook for him. Radev was quickly falling out of pocket, and Williams started to see him as a problem. On April 15, 2003, Radev met up with Carl Williams for coffee at the Brighton Baths. During the meeting, Carl Williams lured Radev to a house in Coburg. He walked to a house, but returned to his Mercedes-Benz to get a cigar. That was the last thing he did. A car pulled up and fired 7 shots into Radev, taking his life on the spot, right next to his Mercedes-Benz. He was dressed in a full Versace outfit and a $20,000 watch on his hand. His bank accounts showed very little activity, and police believe that his associates took at least $200,000 from his Brighton home. His associates, like him, indulged in lavish spending, but they also learned that money couldn't buy safety. Notorious figures like Gangitano and the Morans faced the same fate. Radev was a loner and an unpopular figure in the Melbourne underworld, as he had many enemies, and according to a reporter, there was no crowd spilling out the church doors at his funeral. He loved his wealth so much that he was buried in a gold-plated casket said to be valued $30,000. Years later, a hitman known as the Runner would reveal to the police that he was introduced to Andrew Venumin by Williams' advisor in a Coburg hotel. He would then go on to say that he drove Venumin to take out Nick Radev. Next on the list was Mark Malia, who was working for Radev and was another enforcer in the underworld. Shortly after Radev passed, Malia went to his house and collected his valuables, including the $20,000 watch. However, his greed blinded him to the fact that his time was also running out. Williams saw Malia as a significant threat due to his ties to Radev, so he tried to arrange a meeting with him, but Malia was hesitant. Eventually, he agreed to meet Williams at Crown Casino, a public place with lots of people around and security cameras everywhere. During the meeting, Williams tried to convince Malia that he and his crew had nothing to do with what happened to Radev, but he wasn't buying it. Andrew Venumin was also present, and he accused Malia of plotting against them, suggesting that Malia put out a hit on him because he saw 2 men outside of his house the night before. The meeting ended, and Williams learned that Malia had arranged for 4 heavies to monitor the meeting from a distance and was still scheming against them. This confirmed Williams's fears, and the decision was made to take action. Malia wouldn't agree to another meeting, so Williams planned to trap him by bribing someone close to him. Williams met one of Malia's friends at a venue in Lalore, offering $50,000 to lure Malia Malia to a specific location. The friend accepted, and Malia's days were numbered. Malia was driven by two so-called friends to a house in Lalore and taken to a garage. There, he was brutally beaten, and a soldering iron was used. Williams arrived shortly after with $50,000 in cash, finding Malia bound and gagged but still alive, and police would later reveal that 7 men were involved, along with Andrew Venyamin. The motive behind it was clear. Williams wanted to eliminate the threat, and he also wanted the location to a substantial amount of cash that was hidden by Malia. On August 18, 2003, Malia's charred remains were discovered inside a wheelie bin near a reserve in West Sunshine. On February 28, 2007, Williams pleaded guilty in the Supreme Court of Victoria to taking the lives of Mark Malia, Louis Moran, and his son Jason Moran. He received a life sentence, and 3 years later, on April 19, 2010, he met a similar fate when an inmate attacked him with an exercise bike handle.